Do that now. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys while we now are recording, which we didn't need to yet.
Oh, I can
What
start.
do you guys What do you guys think? Should I share the text in full screen, which is basically like this, but that requires me, and then when I switch to the next one, you're going to have to come out of here, do a bunch of stuff. You lose screen share. Basically, there's some time involved, right? Like exactly what I'm doing right now would have to happen again. And then there's the next one. Or should I just keep things basically in this format where you can kind of see the borders and we can see the different books, and then we can just kind of switch between the books easily?
I think that makes sense to do the tab.
Okay, so to keep the tabs and be able to easily do the switch over.
Yeah. By the way, did you guys hear that beeping noise?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try to figure that out. My
I,
insulin.
I, I honestly think it looks a lot better without the tabs.
Okay.
But I am concerned about how maybe it's okay to have pauses between pages so that people have a chance to,
Between the readings.
yeah.
Yeah, it is actually.
I think the aesthetic of the drawings on these pages and the illustrations is worth starting with the whole page. And if it feels really awkward, I'll use the chat bar to communicate with you, Jaime, that let's just switch it up.
Yeah, and it'll just be twice, right? It's just between the
Yeah.
three different books.
I
So
think so. I think they're so beautiful, and I think the outside thing doesn't look as good. So,
Okay, we'll do it that way.
are you okay with that, Kelly?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think it's important to not be afraid of silences and pauses, you know? So this is a kind of interesting built-in, you know, fracture. This is not Hollywood produced.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so
It's
true.
yeah.
It's an interesting cultural thing that we think we had to fill every silence, as I'm doing right now. So I'm going to be quiet.
It's gonna be great.
Oh my God. Last night we were watching The Office before falling asleep.
God, that's
And
so great.
Michael's going through an awkward breakup. And so Pam says to everybody, just keep him laughing and don't let there be any silences. If there's any silences, just make a weird sound. And so Michael says something and Kevin looks at him and goes, boom, 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 boom.
That helps. It
Made
really
me think
helps.
about these like Zoom meetings, like in no awkward pauses, just bum, 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 bum.
Is that my duty? I should start making some strange awkward.
Yes, Kelly, you didn't read the fine contract on your summer job. It said, if there's any pauses, Kelly, please make weird sound.
Oh God. Okay. I'm ready.
All right, we're ready now.
Are we?
Ready.
I think
I don't
so.
know.
I think so.
All right, it's 3 past, so
Time to
we're gonna
go.
start letting people in.
Okay.
Are folks gonna, do we want to share the thing that you put in the chat as far as the text with everyone, or do you want to erase it from the chat?
It won't be there, I don't think.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Hello and welcome everybody. It looks like we have some new faces and some familiar faces, and as we are all joining in now, while we're getting settled in, I'm going to start this series tonight with the embroidery of the week. And I have to tell you, I'm very excited about this one. I know I'm excited about all of them. They're all amazing, but this one really excited me because it is the first one that we received back from our biocenosis series. And this is actually a bat. And if you look at the detail, I was just explaining what I loved so much about this was the wings. If you, it's it's enchanting. The negative space and the gray just gives you this real pattern and feeling, the texture of the wings. So this is our embroidery of the week by Martha Willem. I don't know if she's on here tonight or not, but this is a beauty. So I'm Jen, and I'm with Metabolic Studio. And what we'll do right now is some introductions. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from Studio City. And tonight I will be working on a new embroidery because I finished my last one, which you may have seen as well. Those are the nematoids. And what I'll be working on is the mycelium network, which I started yesterday, which is very intricate. And I'm going to pass it to Emily Lacey, and we'll just keep going around.
Thanks, Jen. Emily here in Echo Park. Excited to be with you all and start on this new adventure, micro to macro. She, her pronouns. I have interspecies listening going on here. Couple of dogs having a good time. Let me pass it to my friend Kelly Sky that I haven't seen in forever.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name's Kelly. I'm coming from Seattle, Washington. She, her pronouns. And tonight I'm going to be working with my color pencils while I wait for my kit. And so I'm going to be working on a color scheme for a new artwork. And I'm trying to see how colors vibrate together. So that's what I'll be working on. And I will pop it over to Kavi.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Kavi Lal calling in from Sacramento. He, him pronouns. And I'm still working on my hermit thrush from the last series. Hopefully make a little bit of progress and finish this very soon and move on to the next embroidery as well. I'll pass it over to Patricia Watts.
Hi, Patricia Watts, coming from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I've been on hiatus, like it feels like a month, but I'm gonna finish this. I'll pass it on to Jamie Walters.
Hi, yeah, this is Jaime. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm up in the Owens Valley, Payahunadu. Tonight I'll be sharing the reading screen with you guys. And I'll pass it on to Penny Bolin.
That's me. I'm here in Carthay Circle, Los Angeles. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm just excited to be here and see what you guys are up to. I am a photographer and I do social documentaries, and I always work micro to macro. And I'll pass this on to Diego.
Hi, I'm Diego. I use he, him pronouns. I'm calling from Key Largo, Florida. And tonight I'm just going to be working on that I have going. I don't know which one I'll choose yet, but that's what I'll be doing. I'll pass it on to Izzy.
Hi, everyone. My name's Izzy. I use she, they pronouns. I'm calling in from East Hollywood, and tonight I'm working on this fun one. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Roxanne.
Hi, I'm Roxanne calling in from Venice, and I use she, her pronouns. And okay, let's pass it on. Oh, My computer froze. I hope that people hear me.
We didn't, Roxanne, so I'm gonna pass it on to Ansu.
Everyone, can you hear me okay? Okay. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from Silver Lake, and I happily finished my last piece and I'm waiting for a new piece. So excited to start on this new journey with you all and the new readings. I am going to bop the ball over to Stefano. Have you gone yet?
No, I have not. Hi, Stefano from Echo Park. Good to see you all. Excited about this new journey. And Kelly, how you doing?
Hi, Stefano, and everybody else. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm also in Echo Park, and I need to get a new embroidery, so I'll be grabbing that tomorrow. And I am going to pop it over to Caroline.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here. I am joining you tonight from Union in Washington State, in the forest, and I am very happy to be with you. I'll pass it to Kavi if you didn't go yet.
I've gone, but I'll pass it over to Millie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Millie. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm currently mending one of my blouses that's missing a couple of buttons. And I'm really looking forward to this reading and this new journey with all of you. I will pass it on to Mish.
Good evening. I'm Michelle from Highland Park. Pronoun he, him. And I will be working on a sketch, but I don't know which one yet. And I'm excited by the new series, and I will give Kelly Sky, do you go?
Actually,
Okay.
I
I
will,
did go, yeah.
I will take over from now.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have an opportunity to introduce yourself, there'll be plenty of time this evening to introduce and share what you're working on. The Metabolic Studios Learning and Mending series is now in its 5th iteration. In this series, From Micro to Macro, we will be exploring the implications of an integrated form of systems thinking that allows us to think across all scales, from particle, cell, brain, society, ecosystem, to cosmic matter. From micro to macro, we will build upon what we learned about Anna Singh's disturbance ecology and have an emphasis on complexity, networks, and patterns of organization. By first revealing the underlying nature of reality as a unified whole, we are perfectly primed to apply these ecological principles and think through how to restructure our misguided human systems, to stop increasing the entropy of our world and instead begin virtuous cycles of regeneration and health. Since COVID-19 pandemic began, we moved our weekly public studio practice to Zoom, where we have committed ourselves to learning and mending together. Many of you have received embroidery kits from us of native plants, birds, and microscopic organisms that Metabolic Studio is currently cultivating on its project sites. Taken as a collection, all the embroideries will collectively illustrate biogeoconosis, which describes the intimate association between living things and the physical environment. If you've not received an embroidery kit and would like another one, please send your name and mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org. The syllabus for this new series has been specially curated by Ruby Barnett, an independent scholar, feminist, and longtime researcher for Helen and Newton Harrison. Kelly Sky, who has also assisted the Harrisons, will be hosting the discussions for this series. Kelly is an artist, an ecologist, and PhD candidate in media studies at UC Santa Cruz. We thank you for co-creating this opportunity to learn and mend together during these tumultuous times. We invite you to receive these readings as a deep inhale, and we find that crafting together helps to receive these readings as a meditation. We will share our screen, and we encourage you to read a section of the text aloud with us. When there is a pause in the reading, please feel free to unmute yourself and begin where the last person left off. Silence is golden, and there is no pressure to fill the transitional spaces while we enjoy a breath and continue crafting. Feel free to jump in and continue reading at your comfort level. You don't have to read. It's also fine to enjoy listening. And I will now pass it over to Kelly, and she will introduce tonight's reading.
Hi, everybody. So tonight's readings are really exciting. They're by Fritjof Capra, which an author you may have known of. So our first reading is called The Unity of Opposites. And what's really interesting about this reading is he delves into the physics of interconnection. So he starts out by really laying the ground of how things are deeply interconnected. We say that often, but he lays the physics of it out. And so it gives us this really fertile ground to kind of build off of and think about systems theory in terms of how we can go from there to think about more practical and applied applications of how these interconnections work out. So we'll start out with that. It's called The Unity of Opposites. And then we move into a reading from The Web of Life, which also kind of brings it back into the macro realm and talks about how if we can increase our ecological literacy and use principles from ecosystems and from ecology, we can help restructure our systems to actually create more regeneration and health in our world. So it's kind of a nice build, in my opinion, from this very fundamental basis of reality that, we often don't realize how deeply interconnected things are, even on a quantum level, and things that seem to be opposite often have connections that we don't see. And so he starts there, and then we move into the macro realm. So we'll be working on those readings tonight. And I worked on a little bit of a guiding question so that we could have that in our minds as we go through this. And I pulled one quote from his writings, and he writes that about balance. And he says, "The notion of dynamic balance is an essential way in which the unity of opposites is experienced in Eastern mysticism. It is never a static identity, but always a dynamic interplay between two extremes." And so one symbol to kind of keep in our minds is the yin yang symbol from Chinese philosophy, because it really embodies this idea of the unity of opposites and how things that seem disconnected are really in interplay and interaction at all times. And so the guiding question that I came up with is, have you ever thought something was contradictory or a paradox and then found out that it was part of a larger whole? And I'll go ahead and I'll put that into our chat so that we have it in our minds as we go through these readings. And I will go ahead and pass it to Jaime, who can now share the screen.
I'll start us off.
Great.
Beyond the world of opposites. When the Eastern mystics tell us that they experience all things and events as manifestations of a basic oneness, this does not mean that they pronounce all things to be equal. They recognize the individuality of things, but at the same time, they're aware that all differences and contrasts are relative within an all-embracing unity. Since in our normal state of consciousness, this unity of all contrasts, and especially the unity of opposites, is extremely hard to accept, It constitutes one of the most puzzling features of Eastern philosophy. It is, however, an insight which lies at the very root of the Eastern worldview. Opposites are abstract concepts belonging to the realm of thought, and as such, they are relative. By the very act of focusing our attention on any one concept, we create its opposite. As Lao Tzu says, when all in the world understand beauty to be beautiful, then ugliness exists. When all understand goodness to be good, then evil exists. Mystics transcend this realm of intellectual concepts, and in transcending it, become aware of the relativity and polar relationship of all opposites. They realize that good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death are not absolute experiences belonging to a different categories, but are merely two sides of the same reality, extreme parts of a single whole. The awareness that all opposites are polar and thus a unity is seen is one of the highest aims of man in the spiritual traditions of the East. Quote, be in truth eternal, beyond earthly opposites, is Krishna's advice in the Bhagavad Gita. And the same advice is given to the followers of Buddhism. Thus, D.T. Suzuki writes, the fundamental idea of Buddhism is to pass beyond the world of opposites, a world built up by intellectual distinctions and emotional defilements, and to realize the spiritual world of non-distinction, which involves achieving an absolute point of view. The whole of Buddhist teaching, and in fact, the whole of Eastern mysticism, revolves around this absolute point of view, which is reached in the world of akintya, or no thought, where the unity of all opposites becomes a vivid experience. In the words of a Zen poem, at dusk, the cock announces dawn. At midnight, the bright sun.
Great, I can take it from here. So the notion that all opposites are polar, that light and dark, winning and losing, good and evil are merely different aspects of the same phenomenon is one of the basic principles of the Eastern way of life. Since all opposites are interdependent, their conflict can never result in the total victory of one side, but will always be a manifestation of the interplay between the two sides. In the East, a virtuous person is therefore not one who undertakes the impossible task of striving for the good and eliminating the bad, but rather one who is able to maintain a dynamic balance between good and bad. This notion of dynamic balance is essential to the way in which the unity of opposites is experienced in Eastern mysticism. It is never a static identity, but always a dynamic interplay between two extremes. This point has been emphasized most extensively by the Chinese sages and their symbolism of the archetypal poles of yin and yang. They call the unity lying behind yin and yang the Tao, and saw it as the process which brings about their interplay. That which now the dark, now the light appear as Tao. The dynamic unity of polar opposites can be illustrated with the simple example of a circular motion and its projection. Suppose you have a ball going around a circle. If this movement is projected onto a screen, it becomes an oscillation between two extreme points. To keep the analogy with Chinese thought, I have written Tao in the circle and have marked the extreme points of the oscillation with yin and yang. The ball goes around the circle with a constant speed, but in the projection, it slows down as it reaches the edge, turns around, and then accelerates again, only to slow down once more, and so on in endless cycles. In any projection of that kind, the circular movement will appear as an oscillation between two opposite points. But in the movement itself, the opposites are unified and transcended. This image of a dynamic unification of opposites was indeed very much in the minds of the Chinese thinkers that can be seen from the passage in the Changzu quoted previously. That and the this cease to be opposites is the very essence of the Tao. Only the essence, an axis as it were, is the center of the circle responding to the endless changes.
One of the principal polarities in life is one between the male and female sides of human nature. As with polarity of good and bad, or of life and death, we tend to feel uncomfortable with the male-female polarity in ourselves, and therefore we bring one or the other side into prominence. Western society has traditionally favored the male side rather than the female. Instead of recognizing that the personality of each man and of each woman is the result of an interplay between female and male elements, it has established a static order where all men are supposed to be masculine and all women feminine, and it has given men the leading roles in most of society's privileges. This attitude has resulted in an overemphasis of all the yang, or male aspects of human nature: activity, rational thinking, competition, aggressiveness, and so on. The yin, or female modes of consciousness, which can be described by words like intuitive, religious, mystical, occult, or psychic, have constantly been suppressed in our male-oriented society. In Eastern mysticism, these female modes are developed and a unity between the two aspects of human nature is sought. A fully realized human being is one who, in the words of Lao Tzu, knows the masculine and yet keeps the feminine. In many Eastern traditions, the dynamic balance between the male and female modes of consciousness is the principal aim of meditation and is often illustrated in works of art. A superb sculpture of Shiva in the Hindu temple of Elephanta shows three faces of the god. On the right, his male profile displaying virility and willpower. On the left, his female aspect, gentle, charming, seductive. And in the center, the sublime union of the two aspects in the magnificent head of Shiva Mahesvara, the great Lord, radiating serene tranquility and transcendental aloofness. In the same temple, Shiva is also represented in androgynous form, half male, half female, the flowing movement of the god's body and the serene detachment in her face, symbolizing again the dynamic unification of the male and female. In Tantric Buddhism, the male-female polarity is often illustrated with help of sexual symbols. Intuitive wisdom is seen as the passive female quality of human nature, love and compassion is the active male quality, and the union of both in the process of enlightenment is represented by ecstatic sexual embraces of male and female deities. The Eastern mystics affirm that such a union of one's male and female modes can only be experienced on a higher plane of consciousness, where the realm of thought and language is transcended. and all opposites appear as a dynamic unity. I have already asserted that a similar plane has been reached in modern physics. The exploration of the subatomic world has revealed a reality which repeatedly transcends language and reasoning and the unification of concepts, which had hitherto seemed opposite and irreconcilable, turns out to be one of the most startling features of this new reality. These seemingly irreconcilable concepts are generally not the ones the Eastern mystics are concerned with, although sometimes they are, but their unification at a non-ordinary level of reality provides a parallel to Eastern mysticism. Modern physicists should therefore be able to gain insights into some of the central teachings of the Far East by relating them to the experiences in their own field. A small but growing number of young physicists have indeed found this a most valuable and stimulating approach to Eastern mysticism.
Examples of the unification of opposite concepts in modern physics can be found at the subatomic level, where particles are both destructible and indestructible, where matter is both continuous and discontinuous, and force and matter are but different aspects of the same phenomenon. In all these examples, which will be discussed extensively in subsequent chapters, it turns out that the framework of opposite concepts derived from our everyday experience is too narrow for the world of subatomic particles. Relativity theory is crucial for the description of this world, and in the relativistic framework, the classical concepts are transcended by going to a higher dimension, the four-dimensional space-time. Space and time themselves are two concepts which had seemed entirely different, but have been unified in relativistic physics. This fundamental unity is the basis of the unification of the opposite concepts mentioned above. Like the unity of opposites experienced by the mystics, it takes place on a higher plane, that is, in a higher dimension, and like that experienced by the mystics, it is a dynamic unity because the relativistic space-time reality is an intrinsically dynamic reality where objects are also processes and all forms are dynamic patterns. To experience the unification of seemingly separate entities in a higher dimension, we do not need relativity theory. It can also be experienced by going from 1 to 2 dimensions or from 2 to 3. In the example of a circular motion and its projection given above, the opposite poles of the oscillation in one dimension along a line are unified in the circular movement in 2 dimensions in one plane. The image shown below represents another example involving a transition from 2 to 3 dimensions. It shows a donut ring cut horizontally by a plane. In the 2 dimensions of that plane, the surfaces of the cut appear as 2 completely separate disks, but in 3 dimensions, they are recognized as being parts of one and the same object. A similar unification of entities which seem separate and irreconcilable is achieved in relativity theory by going from 3 to 4 dimensions. The 4-dimensional world of relativistic physics is the world where force and matter are unified, where matter can appear as discontinuous particles or as a continuous field. In these cases, however, we can no longer visualize the unity very well. Physicists can experience the 4-dimensional space-time world through the abstract mathematical formalism of their theories, but their visual imagination, like everyone else's, is limited to the 3-dimensional world of the senses. Our language and thought patterns have evolved in this 3-dimensional world, and therefore we find it extremely hard to deal with the 4-dimensional reality of relativistic physics.
Eastern mystics, on the other hand, seem to be able to experience a higher dimensional reality directly and concretely. In the state of deep meditation, they can transcend the three-dimensional world of everyday life and experience a totally different reality where all opposites are unified into an organic whole. When the mystics try to express this experience in words, they are faced with the same problem as the physicists trying to interpret the multidimensional reality of relativistic physics. In the words of Lama Govinda, an experience of higher dimensionality is achieved by integration of experiences of different centers and levels of consciousness. Hence, the indescribability of certain experiences of meditation on the plane of three-dimensional consciousness and within a system of logic which reduces the possibilities of expression by imposing further limits upon the process of thinking. The four-dimensional world of relativity theory is not the only example in modern physics where seemingly contradictory and irreconcilable concepts are seen to be nothing more than different aspects of the same reality. Perhaps the most famous case of such a unification of contradictory concepts is that of the concepts of particles and waves in atomic physics. At the atomic level, matter has a dual aspect. It appears as particles and as waves. Which aspect it shows depends on the situation. In some situations, the particle aspect is dominant. In other, the particles behave more like waves. Excuse me. And this dual nature is also exhibited by light and all other electromagnetic radiation. Light, for example, is emitted and absorbed in the form of quanta or photons. But when these particles of light travel through space, they appear as vibrating electric and magnetic fields, which show all the characteristic behaviors of waves. Electrons are normally considered to be particles, and yet when a beam of these particles is sent through a small slit, it is diffracted just like a beam of light. In other words, electrons too behave like waves.
This dual aspect of matter and radiation is indeed most startling and gave rise to many of the quantum koans, which led to the formation of quantum theory. The picture of a wave which is always spread out in space is fundamentally different from the particle picture, which implies a sharp location. It has taken physicists a long time to accept the fact that matter manifests itself in ways which seem to be mutually exclusive, that particles are also waves, waves also particles. Looking at the two pictures, a layperson might be tempted to think that the contradiction can be resolved by saying that the picture on the right-hand side simply represents a particle moving in a wave pattern. This argument, however, rests on a misunderstanding of the nature of waves. Particles moving in wave patterns do not exist in nature. In a water wave, for example, the particles do not move along with the wave, but move in circles as the wave passes by. Similarly, the air particles in a sound wave merely oscillate back and forth, but do not propagate along with the wave. What is transported along the wave is the disturbance causing the wave phenomenon, but not any material particle. In quantum theory, therefore, we do not speak about a particle's trajectory when we say that the particle is also a wave. What we mean is that the wave pattern as a whole is a manifestation of the particle. The picture of traveling waves is thus totally different from that of traveling particles, as different, in the words of Victor Weisskopf, as the notion of waves on a lake from that of a school of fish swimming in the same direction. Direction of wave, a water wave. The phenomenon of waves is encountered in many different contexts throughout physics and can be described with the same mathematical formalism whenever it occurs. Forms are used to describe a light wave, a vibrating guitar string, a sound wave, or a water wave. In quantum theory, these forms are used again to describe the waves associated with particles. This time, however, the waves are much more abstract. They are closely related to the statistical nature of quantum theory, that is, to the fact that atomic phenomena can only be described in terms of probabilities. The information about the probabilities for a particle is contained in a quantity called the probability function, and the mathematical form of this quantity is that of a wave. That is to say, it is similar to the forms used for the description of other types of waves. The waves associated with particles, however, are not real three-dimensional waves like water waves or sound waves, but are probability waves, abstract mathematical quantities which are related to the probabilities of finding the particles in various places and with various properties.
The introduction of probability waves, in a sense, resolves the paradox of particles being waves by putting it in a totally new context. But at the same time, it leads to another pair of opposite concepts, which is even more fundamental, that of existence and non-existence. This pair of opposites, too, is transcended by the atomic reality. We can never say that an atomic particle exists at a certain place, nor can we say that it does not exist. Being a probability pattern, the particle has tendencies to exist in various places and thus manifests a strange kind of physical reality between existence and non-existence. We cannot therefore describe the state of the particle in terms of fixed opposite concepts. The particle is not present at a definite place, nor is it absent. It does not change its position, nor does it remain at rest. What changes is the probability pattern, and thus the tendencies of the particle to exist in certain places. In the words of Robert Oppenheimer, if we ask, for instance, whether the position of the electron remains the same, we must say no. If we ask whether the electron's position changes with time, we must say no. If we ask whether the electron is at rest, we must say no. If we ask whether it is in motion, we must say no. The reality of the atomic physicist, like the reality of the Eastern mystic, transcends the narrow framework of opposite concepts. Oppenheimer's words thus seem to echo the words of the Upanishads. It moves not. It is far, and it is near. It is within all this, and it is outside of all this. Force and matter, particles and waves, motion and rest, existence and non-existence, these are some of the opposite or contradictory concepts which are transcended in modern physics. Of all these opposite pairs, the last seems to be the most fundamental, and yet in atomic physics, we have to go even beyond the concepts of existence and non-existence. This is the feature of quantum theory which is most difficult to accept and which lies at the heart of the continuing discussion about its interpretation. At the same time, the transcending of the concepts of existence and non-existence is also one of the most puzzling aspects of Eastern mysticism. Like the atomic physicists, the Eastern mystics deal with a reality which lies beyond existence and non-existence, and they frequently emphasize this important fact. Thus, Ashvaghosha, suchness is neither that which is existence, nor that which is non-existence, nor that which is at once existence and non-existence, nor that which is not at once existence and non-existence. Faced with a reality which lies beyond opposite concepts, physicists and mystics have to adopt a special way of thinking where the mind is not fixed in the rigid framework of classical logic, but keeps moving and changing its viewpoint. In atomic physics, for example, we are now used to applying both the particle and the wave concept in our description of matter. We have learned how to play with the two pictures, switching from one to the other and back in order to cope with the atomic reality. This is precisely the way in which the Eastern mystics think when they try to interpret their experience of a reality beyond opposites. In the words of Lama Govinda, the Eastern way of thinking rather consists in a circling round the object of contemplation, a many-sided, for example, multidimensional impression formed from the superimposition of single impressions from different points of view.
And let me pause you there. We're going to skip ahead through this sort of very, very detailed description of wave patterns.
Good.
To, if you want to continue reading, otherwise somebody else can pick it up, the fundamental importance of the uncertainty principle at the bottom of this first page.
Okay, maybe somebody else can take it up.
Okay.
The fundamental importance of the uncertainty principle is that it expresses the limitations of our classical concepts in a precise mathematical form. As described previously, the subatomic world appears as a web of relations between the various parts of a unified whole. Our classical notions derived from our ordinary macroscopic experience are not fully adequate to describe this world. To begin with, the concept of a distinct physical entity like a particle is an idealization which has no fundamental significance. It can only be defined in terms of its connections to the whole, and these connections are statistical nature, probabilities rather than certainties. When we describe the properties of such an entity in terms of classical concepts like position, energy, momentum, and so forth, we find that there are pairs of concepts which are interrelated and cannot be defined simultaneously in a precise way. The more we impose one concept on the physical object, the more the other concept becomes uncertain, and the precise relation between the two is given by the uncertainty principle. For a better understanding of this relation between pairs of classical concepts, Niels Bohr has introduced the notion of complementarity. He considered the particle picture and the wave picture as two complementary descriptions of the same reality, each of them being only partly correct and having a limited range of application. Each picture is needed to give a full description of the atomic reality, and both are to be applied within the limitations given by the uncertainty principle.
This notion of complementarity has become an essential part of the way physicists think about nature, and Bohr has often suggested that it might be a useful concept also outside the field of physics. In fact, the notion of complementarity proved to be extremely useful 2,500 years ago. It played an essential role in ancient Chinese thought, which was based on the insights that opposite concepts stand in a polar or complementary relationship to each other. The Chinese sage represented this complementarity of opposites by the archetypical poles yin and yang and saw their dynamic interplay as the essence of all natural phenomena and all human situations. Niels Bohr was well aware of the parallel between his concept of complementarity and Chinese thought. When he visited China in 1937, at a time when his interpretation of quantum theory had already been fully elaborated, he was deeply impressed by the ancient Chinese notion of polar opposites, and from that time, he maintained an interest in Eastern culture. 10 years later, Bohr was knighted as an acknowledgement of his outstanding achievement in science and important contribution to Danish cultural life. And when he had to choose a suitable motif for his coat of arms, his choice fell on the Chinese symbol of Tai Chi, representing the complementary relationship of the archetypal opposites yin and yang. In choosing this symbol for his coat of arms, together with the inscription Contraria sunt complementa, opposites are complementary, Niels Bohr acknowledged the profound harmony between ancient wisdom, Eastern wisdom, and modern Western science.
So we're going to switch to the next book or the next section. One moment. For some reason my computer is taking as long as it possibly can. Are you guys still with me? I lost my screen over here.
Yep, we're here.
Yeah.
Okay.
You.
Right. Yeah, it's
Yeah, we got you.
the applications. Okay, I think we're getting somewhere. Hold on. Interesting. Let's try that one more time. Okay.
Reconnecting with the web of life means building and nurturing sustainable communities in which we can satisfy our needs and aspirations without diminishing the chances of future generations. For this task, we can learn valuable lessons from the study of ecosystems, which are sustainable communities of plants, animals, and microorganisms. To understand these lessons, we need to learn the basic principles of ecology. We need to become, as it were, ecologically literate. Being ecologically literate or eco-literate means understanding the principles of organization of ecological communities, ecosystems, and using those principles for creating sustainable human communities. We need to revitalize our communities, including our educational communities, business communities, and political communities, so that the principles of ecology become manifest in them as principles of education, management, and politics. The theory of living systems discussed in this book provides a conceptual framework for the link between ecological communities and human communities. Both are living systems that exhibit ties or exhibit the same basic principles of organization. They are networks that are organizationally closed, but open to the flows of energy and resources. Their structures are determined by their histories of structural changes. They are intelligent because of the cognitive dimensions inherent in the process of life. Of course, there are many differences between ecosystems and human communities. There is no self-awareness in ecosystems, no language, no consciousness, and no culture. Therefore, no justice or democracy, but also no greed or dishonesty. We cannot learn anything about those human values and shortcomings from ecosystems. But what we can learn and must learn from them is how to live sustainably. During more than 3 billion years of evolution, the planet's ecosystems have organized themselves in subtle and complex ways so as to maximize sustainability. This wisdom of nature is the essence of ecoliteracy.
Based on the understanding of ecosystems as autopoietic networks and dissipative structures, we can formulate a set of principles of organization that may be identified as the basic principles of ecology and use them as guidelines to build sustainable human communities. The first of those principles is interdependence. All members of an ecological community are interconnected in a vast and intricate network of relationships, the web of life. They derive their essential properties and, in fact, their very existence from their relationships to other things. Interdependence, the mutual dependence of all life processes on one another, is the nature of all ecological relationships. The behavior of every living member of the ecosystem depends on the behavior of many others. The success of the whole community depends on the success of its individual members, while the success of each member depends on the success of the community as a whole. Understanding ecological interdependence means understanding relationships. It requires the shifts of perception that are characteristic of systems thinking. From the parts to the whole, from the objects to relationships, from contents to patterns, a sustainable human community is aware of the multiple relationships among its members. Nourishing the community means nourishing those relationships. The fact that the basic pattern of life is a network pattern means that the relationships among the members of an ecological community are nonlinear, involving multiple feedback loops. Linear chains of cause and effect exist very rarely in ecosystems. Thus, a disturbance will not be limited to a single effect, but is likely to spread out in ever-widening patterns. It may even be amplified by interdependent feedback loops, which may completely obscure the original source of the disturbance. The cyclical nature of ecological processes is an important principle of ecology. The ecosystem's feedback loops are the pathways along which nutrients are continually recycled. Being open systems, all organisms in ecosystem produce waste. But what is waste for one species is food for another, so that the ecosystem as a whole remains without waste. Communities of organisms have evolved in this way over billions of years, continually using and recycling the same molecules of minerals, water, and air. A lesson for human communities here is obvious. A major clash between economics and ecology derives from the fact that nature is cyclical, whereas our industrial systems are linear. Our businesses take resources, transform them into products plus waste, and sell the products to consumers who discard more waste when they have consumed the products. Sustainable patterns of production and consumption need to be cyclical, imitating the cyclical processes in nature. To achieve such cyclical patterns, we need to fundamentally redesign our businesses and our economy. Ecosystems differ from individual organisms in that they are largely, but not completely, closed systems with respect to the flow of matter, while being open with respect to the flow of energy. The primary source for that flow of energy is the sun. Solar energy, transformed into chemical energy by the photosynthesis of green plants, drives most ecological cycles. The implications for maintaining sustainable human communities are again obvious. Solar energy in its many forms, sunlight for solar heating, photovoltaic electricity, wind and hydropower, biomass, and so on, is the only kind of energy that is renewable, economically efficient, and environmentally benign. By disregarding this ecological fact, our political and corporate leaders again and again endanger the health and well-being of millions around the world. The 1991 war in the Persian Gulf, for example, which killed hundreds of thousands, impoverished millions, and caused unprecedented environmental disasters, had its roots to a large extent in the misguided energy policies of the Reagan and Bush administrations. To describe solar energy as an economically efficient assumes that the cost of energy production are counted honestly. This is not the case in most of today's market economies. The so-called free market does not provide consumers with proper information because the social and environmental costs of production are not part of current economic models. These costs are labeled external variables by corporate and government economists because they do not fit in to their theoretical framework.
Corporate economists treat as free commodities not only the air, water, and soil, but also the delicate web of social relations, which is severely affected by continuing economic expansion. Private profits are being made at public costs in the deterioration of the environment and the general quality of life, and at the expense of future generations. The marketplace simply gives us the wrong future generations. The marketplace simply gives us the wrong information. There is a lack of feedback, and basic ecological literacy tells us that such a system is not sustainable. One of the most effective ways to change the situation would be an ecological tax reform. Such a tax reform would be strictly revenue neutral, shifting the tax burden from income taxes to eco taxes. This means that the taxes would be added to existing products, forms of energy, services, and materials so that the prices would better reflect the true costs. In order to be successful, an ecological tax reform needs to be a slow and long-term process to give new technologies and consumption patterns sufficient time to adapt. And the eco-taxes need to be applied predictably to encourage industrial innovation. Such a long-term and slow ecological tax reform would gradually drive wasteful and harmful technologies and consumption patterns out of the market. As energy prices go up, with corresponding income tax reductions to offset the increase, people will increasingly switch from cars to bicycles, use public transportation, and carpool on their way to work. As taxes and petrochemicals and fuel go up, again with offsetting reductions in income taxes, organic farming will become not only the healthiest, but also the cheapest means of producing food. Eco-taxes are now under serious discussion in several European countries and are likely to be introduced in all countries sooner or later. To remain competitive under such a new system, managers and entrepreneurs will need to become ecologically literate. In particular, detailed knowledge of the flow of energy and matter through a company will be essential. And this is why newly developed practice of eco-auditing will be paramount importance. An eco-audit is concerned with the environmental consequences of the flows of material, energy, and people through a company, and therefore with the true cost of production.
Partnership is an essential characteristic of sustainable communities. The cyclical exchanges of energy and resources in an ecosystem are sustained by pervasive cooperation. Indeed, we've seen that since the creation of the first nucleated cells over 2 billion years ago, life on Earth has proceeded through ever more intricate arrangements of cooperation and coevolution. Partnership, the tendency to associate, establish links, live inside one another, and cooperate, is one of the hallmarks of life. In human communities, partnership means democracy, personal empowerment, because each member of the community plays an important role. Combining the principle of partnership with the dynamic of change and development, we may also use the term coevolution metaphorically in human community. As a partnership proceeds, each partner better understands the needs of the other. In a true committed partnership, both partners learn and change. They co-evolve. Here again, we notice the basic tension between the challenge of ecological sustainability and the way in which our present societies are structured, between economics and ecology. Economics emphasizes competition, expansion, and domination. Ecology emphasizes cooperation, conservation, and partnership. The principles of ecology mentioned so far, interdependence, the cyclical flow of resources, cooperation, and partnership, are all different aspects of the same pattern of organization. This is how ecosystems organize themselves to maximize sustainability.
Once we have understood this pattern, we can ask more detailed questions. For example, what is the resilience of these ecological communities? How do they react to outside disturbances? These questions lead us to two further principles of ecology: flexibility and diversity, that enable ecosystems to survive disturbances and adapt to changing conditions. The flexibility of an ecosystem is a consequence of its multiple feedback loops, which tend to bring the system back into balance whenever there is a deviation from the norm, due to changing environmental conditions. For example, if an unusually warm summer results in increased growth of algae in a lake, some species of fish feeding on these algae may flourish and breed more, so that their numbers increase and that they begin to deplete the algae. Once their major source of food is reduced, the fish will begin to die out. As the fish population drops, the algae will recover and expand again. In this way, the original disturbance generates a fluctuation around a feedback loop, which eventually brings the fish/algae system back into balance. Disturbances of that kind happen all the time, because things in the environment change all the time, and thus the net effect is continual fluctuation. All the variables we can observe in an ecosystem, population densities, availability of nutrients, weather patterns, and so forth, always fluctuate. This is how ecosystems maintain themselves in a flexible state, ready to adapt to changing conditions. The web of life is a flexible, ever-fluctuating network. The more variables are kept fluctuating, the more dynamic is the system. The greater its flexibility, and the greater is its ability to adapt to changing conditions. All ecological fluctuations take place between tolerance limits. There is always the danger that the whole system will collapse when a fluctuation goes beyond those limits and the system can no longer compensate for it. The same is true of human communities. Lack of flexibility manifests itself as stress. In particular, stress will occur when one or more variables of the system are pushed to their extreme values, which induces increased rigidity throughout the system. Temporary stress is an essential aspect of life, but prolonged stress is harmful and destructive to the system. These considerations lead to the important realization that managing a social system, a company, a city, or an economy means finding the optimal values for the system's variables. If one tries to maximize any single variable instead of optimizing it, this will invariably lead to the destruction of the system as a whole.
The principle of flexibility also suggests a corresponding strategy of conflict resolution. In every community, there is invariably the contradictions and conflicts which cannot be resolved in favor for one or the other side. For example, the community will need stability and change, order and freedom, tradition and innovation. Rather than rigid decisions, these unavoidable conflicts are much better resolved by establishing a dynamic balance. Ecological literacy includes the knowledge that both sides of the conflict can be important, depending on the context, and the contradictions within a community are signs of its diversity and vitality, and thus contribute to the system's viability. In ecosystems, the role of diversity is closely connected with the system's network structure. A diverse ecosystem will be resilient because it contains many species with overlapping ecological functions that can partially replace one another. When a particular species is destroyed by a severe disturbance so that a link in the network is broken, a diverse community will be able to survive and reorganize itself, because other links in the network can at least partially fulfill the function of the destroyed species. In other words, the more complex the network is, the more complex its patterns of interconnections, the more resilient it will be. In ecosystems, the complexity of the network is a consequence of its biodiversity, and thus a diverse ecological community is a resilient community. In human communities, ethnic and cultural diversity may play the same role. Diversity means many different relationships, many different approaches to the same problem. A diverse community is a resilient community capable of adapting to changing situations. However, the diversity is a strategic advantage only if there is a truly vibrant community sustained by a web of relationships. If the community is fragmented into isolated groups and individuals, diversity can easily become a source of prejudice and friction. But if the community is aware of the interdependence of all of its members, diversity will enrich all the relationships and thus enrich the community as a whole, as well as each individual member. In such a community information and ideas flow freely through their entire network, and the diversity of interpretations and learning styles, even the diversity of mistakes, will enrich the entire community. These then are some of the basic principles of ecology: interdependence, recycling, partnership, flexibility, diversity, and as a consequence of all those, sustainability. As our century comes to a close and we go forward toward the beginning of a new millennia, the survival of humanity will depend on our ecological literacy, on our ability to understand these principles of ecology and live accordingly.
Thank you. I'm going to switch to the third and last text. One moment. Epilogue. The Eastern religious philosophies are concerned with timeless mystical knowledge which lies beyond reasoning and cannot be adequately expressed in words. The relation of this knowledge to modern physics is but one of its many aspects, and like all others, it cannot be demonstrated conclusively. It has to be experienced in a direct, intuitive way. What I hope to have achieved to some extent, therefore, is not a rigorous demonstration, but rather to have given the reader an opportunity to relive, every now and then, an experience which has become for me a source of continuous joy and inspiration. That the principal theories and models of modern physics lead to a view of the world which is internally consistent and in perfect harmony with the views of Eastern mysticism. For those who have experienced this harmony, the significance of the parallels between the worldviews of physicists and mystics is beyond any doubt. The interesting question then is not whether these parallels exist, but why, and furthermore, what their existence implies. In trying to understand the mystery of life, men and women have followed many different approaches. Among them, there are the ways of the scientist and the mystic, but there are many more, the ways of the poets, children, clowns, shamans, to name but a few. These ways have resulted in different descriptions of the world, both verbal and nonverbal, which emphasize different aspects. All are valid and useful in the context in which they arose. All of them, however, are only descriptions or representations of reality and are therefore limited. None can give a complete picture of the world.
The mechanistic worldview of classical physics is useful for the description of the kind of physical phenomena we encounter in our everyday life, and thus appropriate for dealing with our daily environment. And it has also proved extremely successful as a basis for technology. It is inadequate, however, for the description of physical phenomena in the submicroscopic realm. Opposed to the mechanistic conception of the world is the view of the mystics, which may be epitomized by the word organic, as it regards all phenomena in the universe as integral parts of an inseparable, harmonious whole. This worldview emerges in the mystical traditions from meditative states of consciousness. In their description of the world, the mystics use concepts which are derived from these non-ordinary experiences and are, in general, inappropriate for a scientific description of macroscopic phenomena. The organic worldview is not advantageous for constructing machines, nor for coping with the technical problems in an overpopulated world. In everyday life, then, both the mechanistic and the organic views of the universe are valid and useful. The one for science and technology, the other for a balanced and fulfilled spiritual life. Beyond the dimensions of our everyday environment, however, the mechanistic concepts lose their validity and have to be replaced by organic concepts, which are very similar to those used by the mystics. This is the essential experience of modern physics, which has been the subject of our discussion. Physics in the 20th century has shown that the concepts of the organic worldview, although of little value for science and technology on the human scale, become extremely useful at the atomic and subatomic level. The organic view, therefore, seems to be more fundamental than the mechanistic. Classical physics, which is based on the latter, can be derived from quantum theory, which implies the former, whereas the reverse is not possible. This seems to give a first indication why we might expect the worldviews of modern physics and Eastern mysticism to be similar. Both emerge when one inquires into the essential nature of things, into the deeper realms of matter in physics, into the deeper realms of consciousness in mysticism. When one discovers a different reality behind the superficial mechanistic appearance of everyday life. The parallels between the views of physicists and mystics become even more plausible when we recall the other similarities which exist in spite of their different approaches. To begin with, their method is thoroughly empirical. Physicists derive their knowledge from experiments, mystics from meditative insights. Both are observations, and in both fields, these observations are acknowledged as the only source of knowledge. The object of observation is, of course, very different in the two cases. The mystic looks within and explores his or her consciousness at its various levels, which include the body as the physical manifestation of the mind. The experience of one's body is, in fact, emphasized in many Eastern traditions, as is often seen as the key to the mystical experience of the world. When we are healthy, we do not feel any separate parts in our body, but are aware of it as an integrated whole, and this awareness generates a feeling of well-being and happiness. In a similar way, the mystic is aware of the wholeness of the entire cosmos, which is experienced as an extension of the body. In the words of Lama Govinda, to the enlightened man whose consciousness embraces the universe, to him the universe becomes his body. While his physical body becomes a manifestation of the universal mind, his inner vision an expression of the highest reality, and his speech an expression of eternal truth and mantric power. In contrast to the mystic, the physicist begins his inquiry into the essential nature of things by studying the material world. Penetrating into ever deeper realms of matter, he has become aware of the essential unity of all things and events. More than that, he has also learned that he himself and his consciousness are an integral part of this unity. Thus, the mystic and the physicist arrived at the same conclusion, one starting from the inner realm and the other from the outer world. The harmony between their views confirms the ancient Indian wisdom that Brahman, the ultimate reality, without, is identical to Atman, the reality within. A further similarity between the ways of the physicist and mystic is the fact that their observations take place in realms which are inaccessible to the ordinary senses. In modern physics, these are the realms of the atomic and subatomic world. In mysticism, they are non-ordinary states of consciousness in which the sense world is transcended. Mystics often talk about experiencing higher dimensions in which impressions of different centers of consciousness are integrated into a harmonious whole. A similar situation exists in modern physics, where a four-dimensional space-time formalism has been developed which unifies concepts and observations belonging to different categories in the ordinary three-dimensional world. In both fields, the multidimensional experiences transcend the sensory world and are therefore almost impossible to express in ordinary language. We see that the ways of the modern physicist and Eastern mystic, which seem at first totally unrelated, have in fact much in common. It should not be too surprising, therefore, that there are striking parallels in their descriptions of the world. Once these parallels between Western science and Eastern mysticism are accepted, a number of questions will arise concerning their implications. Is modern science, with all its sophisticated machinery, merely rediscovering ancient wisdom known to the Eastern sages for thousands of years? Should physicists therefore abandon the scientific method and begin to meditate? Or can there be a mutual influence between science and mysticism, perhaps even a synthesis?
I think all these questions have to be answered in the negative. I see science and mysticism as two complementary manifestations of the human mind, of its rational and intuitive faculties. The modern physicist experiences the world through an extreme specialization of the rational mind, the mystic through an extreme specialization of the intuitive mind. The two approaches are entirely different and involve far more than a certain view of the physical world. However, they are complementary. As we have learned to say in physics, neither is comprehended in the other, nor can either of them be reduced to the other, but both of them are necessary, supplementing one another for a fuller understanding of the world. To paraphrase an old Chinese saying, mystics understood the roots of the Tao, but not its branches. Scientists understand its branches, but not its roots. Science does not need mysticism, and mysticism does not need science, but men and women need both. Mystical experience is necessary to understand the deepest nature of things, and science is essential for modern life. What we need, therefore, is not a synthesis, but a dynamic interplay between mystical intuition and scientific analysis. So far, this has not been achieved in our society. At present, our attitude is too yang, to use, again, Chinese phraseology, too rational, male, and aggressive. Scientists themselves are a typical example. Although their theories are leading to a worldview which is similar to that of the mystics, it is striking how little this has affected the attitudes of most scientists. In mysticism, knowledge cannot be separated from a certain way of life, which becomes its living manifestation. To acquire mystical knowledge means to undergo a transformation. One could even say that the knowledge is the transformation. Scientific knowledge, on the other hand, can often stay abstract and theoretical. Thus, most of today's physicists do not seem to realize the philosophical, cultural, and spiritual implications of their theories. Many of them actively support a society which is still based on the mechanistic, fragmented worldview, without seeing that science points beyond such a view toward a oneness of the universe, which includes not only our natural environment, but also our fellow human beings. I believe that the worldview implied by modern physics is inconsistent with our present society, which does not reflect the harmonious interrelatedness we observe in nature. To achieve such a state of dynamic balance, a radically different social and economic structure will be needed, a cultural revolution in the true sense of the word. The survival of our whole civilization may depend on whether we can bring about such a change. It will depend ultimately on our ability to adopt some of the yin attitudes of Eastern mysticism to experience the wholeness of nature and the art of living with it in harmony.
Well, that concludes our first reading for this week. And I will pass it over to Kelly.
Just pass it right on over. No problem, guys. We'll just work this through. So, okay, so, you know, I have taken some time to look through these materials, and ultimately what I feel like it's offering us is a view on the fundamental interrelated reality that we live in, like at a quantum physics level. Like what they're finding is that things that we think are opposites and different are actually have interplay within the same universe, right? So that that's the basis that he builds off of. And then the second reading, which I think we can all discuss, is he talks about principles of ecological ecological organization and thinks about how we can apply those to our social and human systems. And it's related in the sense that, you know, we're trying to align our systems more with the fundamental basis of reality, which is interrelated, diverse, flexible network structures, certain things that we need to like think about, and cyclical feedback loops when we're developing our own realities. So that being said, just to try to sum up some of the diverse thoughts that we just saw, I will just restate the question, which is, in your life, have you experienced things that seem contradictory, that seem like a paradox, and yet later on you find out that they're part of the same underlying phenomenon or reality? And you know, I can start by just saying that there's things like a redwood dies and it looks like the physical manifestation of death, and yet within that there's all this life happening, right? So that's one example. But I'd be curious what other people have experienced as paradox or contradictory that are part of the same underlying reality, because I think that's what he's really trying to get us to think about and embrace in ways that we haven't before. So
I would think that the LA Aqueduct and the system that it supports is a good example of those kinds of paradox of life and death, you know, of like water being taken from one place. And if you were based in the Owens Valley, you would think this whole system is only producing death, right? Because lots of things have died here because of it. And if you live in Los Angeles, you think, you know, this bounty of water is just life, and we just have so much life coming to us. And you could, if you're ignorant of the other side of it, you could think that that would be the only part of it. But ultimately, they're both part of the same system.
I have a similar response in a way to some of what the materials talked about, using natural things like wind and water and so forth to create what fuels our modern world, electricity in particular, so that we can kind of keep going with that. But I think there's a paradox there, because they talked about methods of creation that, in fact, like wind. We really understand now that these wind farms are they are avian death camps. So we as human beings, another paradox within the paradox is that we want to do the right thing. I think basically we want to do the right thing, and so we come up with a technology, and boy, it's the wrong thing, like glass buildings that birds fly into and glass memorials. And so that there's a disconnect there. That this kind of material doesn't help us resolve. And I wonder about that.
One of the things that I've been thinking about with paradox has to do with the fires of the West that we've been experiencing, and then what we were learning about when we were studying indigenous fire-keeping strategies, where fire was used to actually control the possibility of forest fires. So the idea that fire is a tool for diversity and regeneration, but the prevention of fire has created this incredible sense of ultimate destruction, seems to me an example of paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that example, Lauren, because I think within the ecological realm, there's a lot of things that are opposite to what our perception is. For instance, the something that the Harrisons often told me were the control of floods is the spreading of waters. So it's like, it sounds like a paradox because we're used to the word control, like controlling the flood. But actually, if we spread the waters and we allow floodplains to exist, that can actually be a part of the system that allows the healthy processes to continue. And so sometimes our language, and I think Fritjof also is pointing to this, our language and our day-to-day ideas are based in kind of this or that. And actually we need to break beyond that and think about what lies in between our ways of defining things. So control needs to be redefined because it's not serving us.
I think it goes back to the part of the Web of Life reading, I guess, towards the end, where the reading was about how the sort of objective study of the universe at the subatomic scale leads to a different understanding of the world, but that while physicists have sort of intellectually comprehended that thoroughly permeates their own self and consciousness, the larger culture of an objectified world out there is far more powerful and seductive and has a hegemonic control of the ways of thinking about the world, so that all of these concepts that are good and bad, or up and down, or better and worse, are filtered through, first of all, the sense of self or of human consciousness that places a premium on the human as separate from the world and as above all of other life. And we never, our entire self-definition is about denying that we are part of the animal world, for example, when we are inseparable from our biology, which is horrifically similar to bananas and apes and every other eukaryote. So it's a grand, even the writing itself, as soon as you try to be objective, which is a fallacy, I think, of the European English language, you lose the sense of the world. And other languages, to your point, Kelly, have a much more resonant way of handling these quandaries of paradoxes.
Can you give us an example?
Well, one of the examples that Kelly brought up was the word flood, and that is implied to be a negative thing because it damages things that are of value to humans, and that's seen through the framework of English, whereas another way of looking at the world, which encompasses the paradox that floods are actually feeding
the land. That's part of a natural regenerative cycle. And I'm sure there are languages that encompass that principle.
Mhm. Thank you.
Going back to the original question, one thing that Ansu said that reminded me of an instance where I had an experience of this, understanding that things that I thought were polar opposites, or things that I thought were opposites, I realized they were actually polar opposites, that they were both poles of the same thing. This, like, when I sort of first came to be aware of, the lopsidedness of the current culture in terms of valuing rationality and objectivity, and that being the source of the kind of like anthropocentrism that just absolutely plagues us now. My first sort of reaction to it was to purge myself of those aspects of thinking and viewing the world. But I think at some point it occurred to me that, those things have a place. There is a place for sort of the more directional thinking and perception of the world. But what's the problem is not that behavior exists or that behavior takes place, because any species has a kind of a way into that. Any species has a way of perceiving the world and ordering things, based on what they can perceive. But the problem is sort of making it holy, mythologizing it, taking that to the exclusion of all else, and raising it to be, the pole around which everything else is oriented. And so I think that, like, it gave me a much broader perspective to see how the kinds of things that have been co-opted by the dominant culture and the dominant, historical process that has landed us here and now. In lots of cultures, there's a place for that. There's space for those kinds of things, but they don't let them get so out of hand. They don't put them in the absolute core center of their culture, and therefore they allow them to the rational associated qualities of mind, broadly thought of as different from body, even though that's a farce too. But when they're not so prioritized and so centered, then they can act in concert in relation with their opposites, their complements. Oh, I've been really rambling, but in the middle of that, I just thought of something else, so I could think of another example, but if anyone else wants to go.
Give us another example.
Yeah, Diego.
The big one that the biggest one that I can't believe how I missed this was mind and body. Like, my whole life, I grew up thinking that, your mind is this detached, floating, eternal substance that is just trapped in, a sack of something, or it's contained inside of your body. And your body is just this kind of inert stuff that is automated and moved by your mind and your soul and your will. But no, that your mind is made of your body. Your mind is absolutely continuous with the matter that makes up, what you are. Everything that we perceive is made out of, our brains. We only perceive we only have the minds that we have because our brains are materially and our bodies are materially what they are. A whale has an absolutely different consciousness and a different mind than a human does. A spider has an absolutely different mind and consciousness than a human does. And that it's the source of such a, it's one of the main things that we latched onto to kind of prove to ourselves that we're so separate from the rest of, you know, of animality. It's like we have a mind, we have a soul, we have a, you know, we've separated ourselves from the rest of embodied nature, and look at you animals still wrapped up in the mud, you know, just essentially being your body and not having a mind. But it's because we don't see our own kind of subjectivity in them, because I mean, how could we? It's impossible that they would have our subjectivity. And so realizing that made me realize that they also have a kind of like felt separation, which really isn't actually separation, but a kind of felt consciousness that is tantamount to ours, but radically and entirely different.
But there's no way that we can say that the spider and the whale have a different mind-body consciousness than we do. There's no
Well,
way.
how could it possibly be that they do?
Well, it seems to
Or
me
that they have the same consciousness?
that I keep wanting to say that it's a gradient, but actually gradient implies hierarchy. And I don't think there's any hierarchy. I just think that there's difference between the whale's consciousness and your human consciousness, because inevitably you had different experiences, you have different genetic fibers running through your being. Like it's different, but yet it's still consciousness. It's not any lower or higher on any gradient. However, there's a spectrum. Maybe spectrum is a better word. And I'm looking for words here because of our limitation of language and our normal way of thinking, of categorizing things. But like, I love what you're saying, Diego, because I like what you're saying too, that we get caught up on a really strong polarity and thinking that that is reality and we circle around it. And yet there's all these other dimensions that we're not paying attention to because, you know, so anyway, yeah.
I mean, it's just really like a trait like any other, like just how eyesight is this kind of broad spectrum of like, you know, perceiving light, but depending on how your eyes are built, you're having a completely different like sensory and integrating experience if you're a mantis shrimp versus a dog or a human. Like a cave salamander doesn't need eyesight the way that a hawk does. And so, you know, a human needs consciousness in a different degree and in a different like adaptation than any other animal does.
Well, on the mind-body problem and the issue of the difference between humans and animals, humans are definitely not the most niche animals. We're universal, and that's because of culture, because we have learned to create joint power through culture. And on the mind-body issue, it's really interesting how this you know, oodles of academia in the neurology world about the human brain and how it creates moral reasoning and consciousness and everything like that. And one of the distinguishing features that we tell ourselves, or the sort of the hegemonic narrative that humans cling to create this distorted human-centric world, is that we have a rational brain, the science brain, the extreme of rationality that is unavailable to any other human, to any other animal. And repeatedly, you know, people who study consciousness and the brain say that equally one of the faculties of this human brain is our almost default capacity to lie to ourselves. So one of the first things we do is we lie to ourselves, we make ourselves look good. We do this culturally all the time. It's just a facet of faculty of being human. Just like we have the faculty of reaching altered states of consciousness. And so we have sort of set these very tautological claims that we are untouchable and and unreachable and quite distinct from the rest of life. When in truth, the way that we create, our memories and our projections and all the things that we say are unique to us may be replicable actually in other animals, in whales, in spiders. There have been many instances where it's not only humans that can do that, what we claim is only human. And we're nowhere near a full sort of definitive, if you can call it that, biological categorization of what is human and what is not. So it's an utter fiction that we live by, but it's a very powerful, seductive narrative that we cling to.
I think that we exponentially know more about our dogs, our cats, whales, dolphins, all of these other species of the world, and I think that we can't say that a cave salamander needs something different than a hawk. What they both need is the facilities to accommodate them in the environments that they thrive in, that they live in. And so a salamander has to really have good eyesight for the dark. And a hawk has to have really good eyesight for some small thing that's moving so he or she can get to it. So,
Yeah,
so I do think to anthropomorphize it and to say, well, we sit and think that our brains are better than this or better than that. I don't accept that. I think
I chose the salamander because they don't have eyes. They have vestigial eyes. They don't use eyesight as a way to orient themselves. And there are plenty of animals which rely on more embodied senses, like, navigation based on electromagnetic fields, or any other suite of senses that don't rely on the kind of integrative articulation of sense data that we call our consciousness to procure their nutrients, to situate themselves in the environment. And so it's not.
They're both using whatever is at hand for them based on their environment and their genetics and species to exist in the same way. And that, I think, is the critical understanding that we have to have. So we don't think that our dogs are dumb animals anymore. We see how much intuition they have. So I think that that's really the way to frame the difference in our species, is that we're all doing the best we can, no matter if we're a toad or a gorilla. We're just living, trying to survive and be happy in our environment.
Absolutely. And the way that happens for each of us is as different as any of the other traits that are constituting that trying our best.
Exactly. And that difference doesn't have to imply hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean? It doesn't, it's just difference. That's all.
Right.
And that's what I think Frithjof was trying to say too, is like, ultimately these things that you see as difference are just difference. They're not, they're not like one or the other. It's and in both more than it is either or. But anyways, I feel like I should wrap us down. I appreciate you guys pushing through those readings. They were a little longer than normal. As we go forward, they'll be a little bit more applicable to your everyday life. But it was great to start out with these like deep physical laws that are underlying these ideas that we have, that we talk about. Like, I don't know, I found it enriching to go through some of the physics of my own beliefs, my own personal understanding of the world, and realize that, yeah, like there's things we don't understand that are connected, and it's because we have limitations in our three-dimensional everyday world, that we can't see that fourth dimension that kind of connects it all. And, you know, I think that's really what he was talking about in a lot of these readings. So anyways, I appreciate you guys and thank you. And
Thank you, Kelly.
Next week. Yeah.
So before we close, we're going to pass it to Jen. Go. We have a little video for us. Go for it.
Oh, so each week in the last series, we featured a time-lapse video of mushrooms. And what we wanted to focus on this series was mending in terms of embroidery. So I will share my screen now and we'll watch a couple minutes of that. And let's see, I just want to make sure that you can all see it. And probably hear my dog barking in the background. So I'm gonna just press play and tell her to be quiet.
Here, buddy.
And one of the things I just wanted to touch upon that I thought was so cool is like right now, it's just the outline, which is a different approach to going about the embroidery. And I'll just stop it here for now. But one of the things that I thought was really cool is how the person was going around the outline. They were changing the color, which I think gives it a great sense of dimension. And there'll be more for us to share as the weeks go on. And if you have any questions about the embroideries, or like we said, if you would like another one, if you've completed yours, please send us your name and email. I mean, your name and address in at info@metabolicstudio.org. So sorry, I fed her dinner, yet she's standing next to me barking. I don't know what to do. I'm gonna mute it for a second, tell her to time out.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. This was really
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.
We'll see you all next week.
Good night.
It's weird.
Night, everyone.
All right.